everyone. My name's Claire and I'm a lecturer at UEA. I started my working life as a journalist. I was a reporter for a newspaper in London called The Voice. It's a black community newspaper, and I was there in the 1990s, and I want to tell you about one of the first stories I covered. So one day at home, I was listening to the radio. There was a very brief item that came on the radio about a teenager who had been chased and had lost his life. That was the only information that I had. In the newspapers the next day, there was barely anything there, but I had a hunch that there was something that wasn't right, that there was more of a story to this. So I looked into it and went to see the parents who lived in southeast London. They were numb, as you would expect parents would be after the loss of their child, and they told me that their son had been at a bus stop and with his friends, and he'd been chased and stabbed, and that he'd been left in a pool of blood. So those parents were Doreen and Neville Lawrence, and that boy was Stephen Lawrence, whose name you all should know. I would like to say that there were lots of journalists who covered that case and that the newspapers were full of the story of the time, but that wasn't the case. It was only months later that the newspapers picked up on that story, the national newspapers. We'd covered it in The Voice. The reason why the papers picked up on it, the nationals, was because Neville Lawrence was doing some decorating work in the house of the editor of the Daily Mail, Paul Dacker. Paul Dacker ran the story, and the papers picked up on it. And the rest is history. We know what happened as a result. This story reminds me of the death of George Floyd, because very easily we might not know of George Floyd's death in the same way as we might not have known the name Stephen Lawrence. George Floyd, we know his name because lots of witnesses took pictures of the incident. Lots of people filmed the moment in all its detail of a police officer kneeling on this man's neck for 9 minutes while he said he couldn't breathe, pleaded for his life, pleaded for his dead mother. There are lots of people whose names we do not know. Stephen Lawrence, George Floyd, these are not isolated tragedies. They're casualties of violence which is built into the fabric of our society. We live in a society which values black lives less than white lives. The deaths of Stephen Lawrence and George Floyd and all the other people who've lost their lives so brutally as a result of violence, racial violence, this is a product of systemic racism. It's not isolated. As a result of systemic racism, black women are more than 5 times more likely to die in childbirth. Systemic racism means that black children are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended from school. It means that black people are 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched by police. It means that less than 1% of university professors are black. It means that black graduates earn 17% less than white graduates. I could go on. Behind these statistics are real people with real feelings who suffer the consequences of everyday racism. Black Lives Matter is relevant because it brings attention to the fact that as black people, we're subjected to different forms of systemic racism and violence. And that because some of us are killed as a result. We'd like to think that it would be nice to live in a world where all lives mattered and that we could just say all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter, but the fact is that at the moment they don't. This is why we say that Black lives matter. We will know that Black lives really do matter when our schools start to teach us about Africa as being a place where before empire there were these vast civilizations, and that people have sophisticated language systems, sophisticated learning systems, value systems. We all know that Black lives really do matter when history does not mean European history, philosophy does not mean European philosophy, literature does not mean European literature. We'll know that Black lives really do matter when a man in Manchester is not tasered in front of his child because he broke lockdown rules. Just the same way as a man in London who drove 250 miles across the country with his child in his car to apparently test his eyesight does not have a taser turned on him. We can either be complicit with racism, we can either go around saying, oh, well, it doesn't really, these things happen and, there are lots of terrible things that happen in society. We can go around resisting this, or we can actually do something about it. We can take action. And one of the writers who I really like, who I teach, is Toni Morrison, and she says, what can you do where you are? So I'd like to ask all of you, what can you do where you are? What are you doing to educate yourselves? What are you doing as a parent to ensure that your child knows about the world, the real world? A world which means that if they're white, that they're at the centre of this world, that they have particular privileges that don't affect, which Black people don't have. What are you doing in your workplace? What are you doing in schools? What are you doing in universities? What kind of conversations are you having with your friends? If every one of us does something where we are, however small, we can help create meaningful change. We can help create societies where Black lives really do matter.